Welcome to the Hot Chicks Write Hot Books podcast with Jenn Foster and Melanie Johnson, where authors give you their inside secret tips on how to be a successful best-selling author.
Hi, this is Melanie Johnson along with Jenn Foster today. Thanks for joining us. We want to remind you that this broadcast is brought to you by Elite Online Publishing. If you'd like to get your book published, please look us up at eliteonlinepublishing.com. And if you'd like to join us at one of our fabulous book writing retreats, you can go to bookwritingretreats.com, and we'd love to have you join us to write your book and have us make you a #1 bestseller. Today we have with us David Gregory Smith. He has written several books, and I'm really interested in talking with him because he has been like kind of a crossover guy. He has written nonfiction and fiction books, so I'm interested to hear his story and how he got started. He's got some great tips for us and to tell us about his books. Welcome, David. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Melanie. Great to be here.
Terrific. Well, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started in writing.
Well, I'm what you would call a late blooming author. I didn't start writing really until I was about 40, I suppose. I actually was working for a nonprofit organization up in the Dallas area in the late 90s, and I started working with a couple of fellows who actually had been former pastors, and I was interested in putting their material into book form because I liked their material so much. And so I ended up completing those two projects. That was the nonfiction writing that I have done. And then after that, I was in graduate school, actually in seminary, and I began writing as an independent study project my first fiction. And so that was in 2001. So that's how I got started late in a writing career.
That's great. I really love that you took the material that you had from ministers and repurposed it to make a book.
Yeah, I kind of fancy myself as an organizer of information. I enjoy organizing information, and so especially the longer of those two projects, it involved. Actually, it took about a year and a half. It involved an incredible amount of information off of, at the time, audio tapes to take and to massage and to organize and to arrange and to do everything that was necessary in order to produce something that sounded like it was a book rather than just a collection of transcripts from audio tapes.
That's great. So back in the day when they had tape recorders.
Exactly. Back in the day, yes.
Yeah.
How did you come up with your first idea for your fiction book?
Well, I was taking a course on comparative religion in seminary, and I was interested in taking some of that material and putting it into book form. And I was thinking nonfiction, because I'm really a nonfiction guy. About 99% of what I read is nonfiction. I think mostly in nonfiction terms, and so I was thinking nonfiction. But I took a class on creative writing, and I'd really never done any fiction writing before. In that class, I started working on a couple of real short fiction scenes, and we had some assignments, and I thought I really enjoy writing dialogue. And so the idea came to my mind. Why don't I take this material on comparative religion that I want to put into a book form and put it into a simple little story? So I came up with a story about a guy from Cincinnati in his middle 30s, kind of a skeptical agnostic, who receives a dinner invitation to dine at a nice Italian restaurant with Jesus of Nazareth. And so he ends up accepting the invitation and going because he figures, well, some guys at work are playing a prank on me, but what's the worst that can happen? I get a nice Italian meal out of it. And so he goes, and he's seated with this guy who claims to be Jesus. And so really it's a short 100-page story that I called Dinner with a Perfect Stranger. And it's essentially just kind of a what would you want to talk to Jesus about if you had him to yourself for 2 hours kind of premise. And so that's how I ended up writing my first fiction.
That's great. Sounds very interesting. I'd like to read that.
Yeah, I mean, don't set aside too much time for it. It's about long enough to read on a plane trip from Dallas to Atlanta. That's about it.
But I think that's kind of the trend these days is shorter books. Everything is coming in quick sound bites. You know, all the commercials, the videos, everything is shorter. So I like it. It's less of a commitment for people than having to read a whole huge book. So I think that's a great idea. Now, you have another new book coming out. Is it about the same size, or you think it's going to be longer, just on the size category?
It's a little longer, but not a whole lot longer. I've gotten to the point. I've written what I call novellas, which are typically anything that's 200 pages or less in fiction form would be called a novella. And so I've written 5 novellas. This would be my 6th. And I've written 1 full-length novel, and I tend to like sticking with the novellas. I agree with what you just said. There's something about a novella that appeals to people. You can get into it, you can get out of it fairly quickly, and my novellas really are a combination of I want to write an entertaining, engaging story so that people really are hooked and they enjoy the read, but I also really am conveying some information that I want to convey. And so the new book that I have coming out is called Patriot Rules. It's longer than Dinner with a Perfect Stranger. It's, maybe 140 pages or so. And it's coming out first as an ebook. It'll be out on by January the 1st. And it's an entirely different topic area. It's just it's a fun story about time travel and the Founding Fathers. And so the intent of this story is to take people back to be talking with the Founding Fathers through the person of the main character of the book, who's a college student, and to expose people more and more to what the Founding Fathers what their philosophy was as far as why they set up our governmental system the way they did, and what their rationale was concerning their view of human nature and why this was the best kind of government. This work is the best kind of government. And so really it's just a fun way to take people back to the Founding Fathers and converse with the Founding Fathers about what their philosophy was.
Very, very cool. Now, will this also have a spiritual undertone to it or a spiritual tone to it?
No, really it doesn't. I mean, I actually use a lot of the exact quotes from the Founding Fathers' writing in the book, and so there are 3 or 4 times when they refer to God or Providence or something, but that's taken directly from their writings, and so that's really the only spiritual type of aspect of the book. It's essentially a secular book. Okay,
great. Well, and that goes back to your expertise in gathering information and organizing information. Getting those quotes.
To me, it was wonderful to go back and actually do a lot of reading in the Founding Fathers and to begin to just collate. Here are a bunch of quotes that really explain what these guys were thinking and why they put the American government, why they established it as they did, and what their philosophy was. And it was fun just to go back and to see what their thoughts were and to select, okay, what are the best quotes from them that I can use to actually put in some dialogue in the book.
And I really like that you have these shorter books to these novellas, because so many people, when they're starting a book, especially probably nonfiction or especially fiction as well as nonfiction, it becomes this daunting project. They have to have this huge book, 300 pages. So you've been able to crank out these books quicker, more efficiently, and become an author of multiple books, and because you've kept it quicker and shorter books. Tell me a little bit for what is your writing style? So you're an avid writer. You've written at least 6 books, you're telling us. So how do you start the process for writing?
Well, I really start the process as a conceptual level. What do I want to convey to the reader as far as the takeaway that I want for them? I'm very unusual for a fiction author in that most fiction authors, their focus is on the story and the story arc and the character arc and what story do they want to weave for for the audience. That's not really my starting point. My starting point is always, what's the message I want to convey to the audience? And so the story, in essence, is just a vehicle for the message that I want to convey. In the book Patriot Rules, for instance, the message I want to convey is there's certain foundational truths about human nature and how we relate to one another that cause this Republican form of government to be the best system of government. And so the message I wanted to convey was why that works, and why the founding fathers' philosophy is the best governmental philosophy. And so the story is a vehicle to convey that message. And as I said, I want it to be entertaining and engaging, but I want the reader to go away with either being convinced of the message that I'm conveying, or at the very least, and I think this happens more often, I just want them to think about it. I want it to be something that engages them at an intellectual level, and it's like, that's really interesting. I'll go away and think about that. And so that's really what engages me as a writer.
That's great. And
Go
so
ahead.
Okay, I like how you start with the end in mind. What's the message you want to convey. But what is your writing process? Like, do you start by just sitting down and typing, or do you, record yourself talking, or what kind of a process do you do in the writing?
I never record myself talking. Really, what I start off doing is kind of like what a nonfiction writer would do, because as I said, I'm a nonfiction thinker. I begin collecting information. And so I hoard information. I start collecting articles and online links and so forth that are good pieces of information. It's like, this is a piece of information I want to include somewhere in the book. This is a piece of information I want to include somewhere in the book. And so as I get that information together, then it accumulates. I try to keep it in one place. I'm not a very good organizer. It accumulates to kind of a place where I can actually begin to say, okay, how would I arrange this information in story form? Is there a logical flow to this? And so that's really the way that is kind of simultaneous with what's the story idea I have in mind, and therefore, obviously I have to develop the story. And so it's kind of a simultaneous, what's the story idea I have in mind, how is that story going to flow, and how do I want to fit this information into the story in a meaningful way.
Awesome. And I want to go back to starting with the message again. I think you're way ahead of a lot of authors, because that's one of the methods that we teach, is start with the outcome first.
Yeah.
How you want the reader to feel when they close that book. What is the message they're going to get? What are they going to feel like? And how is it going to affect their lives and benefit their lives after they've read your book? So that's great that you think of that first. It's almost like working from the inside out, And
yes, it is. Yeah, and as I said, it's very different from the way most fiction authors would write. I mean, you read. I read a book by Stephen King, a while back, and he was talking about his writing process. It's totally different. But Stephen King is not trying to accomplish through his writing what I'm trying to accomplish. And so, my method works for what I'm trying to accomplish.
So what are some of the do's and don'ts in your writing process that you would say, give advice to another author? Definitely do this, and definitely do not do this when you're starting to write.
Well, I mean, this is kind of everybody says this. Do write consistently. I mean, and the flip side of that is, don't wait until you have time to write, because you'll never have time to write. And so, there's the phrase "writers write," and if you're going to write a book, then you actually need to put words into a Word document and actually start. Once you have something there, you can work with it. But if all it is a concept, I'd love to write a book someday. That's not going to produce anything. And so that's my biggest advice: is simply start to write. Prior to the actually starting to write, I find the process that I described of essentially hoarding information, collecting sources. If the book involves talking with people, interviewing people, getting information from other people that you want to bring into the book, then go ahead and do those things. I find the more information that I have to work with, then by far the richer the book ends up being. If I end up only using 25 to 50% of the information that I have, then great. I've used the best information, and I've left some on the side. That's what I did. I remember doing with one of my fiction books called nonfiction books called The Rest of the Gospel. I actually had at least twice as much material transcribed from these audio tapes as I ended up using. There was enough material there to write an entire other book, which actually isn't a bad idea, to have so much material that you can write a sequel if you want to. So that's my biggest advice, is to begin putting together information, especially for nonfiction writers, and begin collecting information from other people or other sources that you want to use, and then as you do that, begin the writing process. You don't have to start at the beginning, and you don't have to have the whole thing kind of perfected in your mind before you start writing. I oftentimes write a chapter from the middle of my book before I write the chapter at the beginning, the first chapter. I don't mind writing chapters out of sequence, and so especially for a nonfiction writer, writing chapters out of sequence is easy to do. I mean, they don't have to flow in sequential order. I mean, eventually in the book they do, but not as you're writing them.
Yeah, that's really good. Those are really good do's and don'ts. It's really good. So tell us a funny story. Has anything happened to you since you've become an author that's a funny story, or you ran into someone, or because you had a book?
Well, a couple things come to mind. The funniest story really was how I became a full-time author. I just dropped into this career. It was completely unplanned. As I said, I don't even read much fiction. Every once in a while, I used to pick up a Michael Crichton novel when he was still writing and alive. And so when I thought about writing a fiction story in seminary, I began writing that as an independent study project my last semester. After I graduated, I ended up finishing it on my own, and then self-published it. And I actually just went through the process of actually self-publishing a book a hard copy book in print, and printed, I don't know how many copies I had, maybe 1,000 copies or so. And I figured, hey, if I can get rid of half of these, then if I can con enough friends and family and people that I meet into buying these from me, I'll break even, and that will accomplish my purpose. I just wanted this message to give to people from the book Dinner with a Perfect Stranger. Mm-hmm. Well, Random House's Christian Publishing Division, Waterbrook Press, got a hold of it, and they contacted me and they said, we want to publish your book. And so I had not been published by a major publishing house, and so I said, sure. Well, needless to say, this is a little unusual. I had actually sent them, I had a contact at Waterbrook Press because of one of my earlier nonfiction books. So I sent them a copy and just said, hey, remember me, here's a copy of a novella I've written. So they wanted to publish it. So I said, great. And they apparently were going to do about a 20,000 copy print run, which was very good for an unknown author, first fiction. And they ended up sending it up to the top executives at Random House in New York, because they ran most or all of their books by them. And the people at the top executives at Random House said, we think we can really make a go of this. Let's print a whole bunch of copies. And so they ended up printing about 200,000 copies. Well, if you got 200,000 copies of a book sitting in a warehouse, you better do a pretty good marketing campaign for it. So they did. And all of a sudden, I had a bestseller on my hands. And so, therefore, I had a fiction writing career, because needless to say, they wanted me to write some more. So they signed me to a contract to write some more, and so that's how I got started with all that. And so it was something I really just fell into, had no intention of pursuing on my own, and so that's what I've been doing since. As far as a personal little story, I remember being in the airport at the Dallas-Fort Worth airport, and this was not too long after Dinner with a Perfect Stranger had come out, and the book was on the shelf there in the bookstore at the Dallas-Fort Worth airport, and I saw a guy not too far away from me take it off the shelf, and he was looking at it, and I just said, I've heard that's a really good book. And he looked at me, and then he opened the inside cover, and you know, he looked at my picture on the dust jacket on the inside, and he could tell it was, you know, I was the guy who'd written the book, and he just laughed, and I laughed. So anyway, it was just kind of a funny little experience in the airport.
Yeah, that's great. That's so fun, and to see your book in the airport, that would be exciting.
Yes, no doubt about that.
And I'm so glad you shared your publishing story with us. So it really encourages the self-publish community to say, hey, you never know what can happen. Just get your book out there. You don't have to rely on the big publishing houses to accept you, because so many times you get turned down over and over again. But getting your book out there, you just don't know if you're going to get discovered. And you took the step to not just wait around. You were sending your books out to different publishing houses and being active. That's awesome.
Yeah, and that certainly was a way that you know, that God blessed me at that point in a way that was completely unexpected. Nowadays, authors have so many more avenues to get their books out now than they did 20 years ago. With you know, with all the ebooks and the new technology and the social media and the ability to market things on your own and so forth, you know, on the one hand, it's a lot more work than just writing a book and then sending it to a publisher and the publisher doing all the work to sell the book. But on the other hand, you know, realistically, that happens to very few people. And there are a lot of good books out there that a publisher might think, man, this is not really matching what we want to do, or doesn't seem like this is you know, of any interest to us. But that's not to say that the book can't be successful. I know, for instance, you remember the book that came out a number of years ago called The Shack that sold about, I don't know, whatever, 15 million copies or something. Well, I had a mutual friend of Paul Young who wrote The Shack, who connected us, and he sent me a manuscript version of The Shack while it was still in process. And he said, I'd like you to read this manuscript and tell me what you think. And I got back with him and said, I think this is fantastic. And he said, would you endorse it? And I said, I'd love to. And so so I was able to witness what happened with The Shack as it went through the self-publishing stage and became a bestseller as a self-published book. Well, needless to say, at that point, the major publishers wanted to take it over, and so, you know, that was arranged. But you never know. I think there were publishers that turned down The Shack. And I had somebody in the Christian publishing industry tell me, well, nobody's interested in a book about the Trinity. Well, sold 15 or 20 million copies. And so, you know.
Yeah, 15 or 20 million people were interested, maybe just
right, yeah, right? Exactly. And so, you know, the publishing industry consists of people who make mistakes in their evaluations because they're human. And so you never know what people are going to be interested in, and you never know that there might be a niche that people, maybe it's not a huge niche, but there may be people that are really interested in what you have to say about a certain topic, and it may be 1,000 people, it may be 10,000 people, it may not be 1 million people. But writing a book and getting it read by 10,000 people is a huge accomplishment. And so, you know, I encourage people to pursue that if that's what their dream is.
I think it's such a blessing now. Think of, the old style of publishing. There were so many voices that didn't get heard. And now today with, with the ebook and Amazon and all these other avenues that you can go, your voice can be heard if you just implement and, take the bull by the horns and write and get your book out there. Whether you try and do it yourself and get all it uploaded, or you use a service like ours, Elite Online Publishing, to do all the heavy lifting for you and get your book out there. But at least you can have your voice now, and no one can stop you except for yourself.
Yes, exactly. It's to such a huge degree now. The success of an author is really on his or her shoulders. Years ago it was on, and not that many years ago, it was on the publisher's shoulders. But the publisher, if a publisher is publishing a book, then obviously the success of the book has a lot to do with them. But authors are not restricted to, by any means anymore, to finding success through the traditional publishing route. And so, there are so many success stories that have nothing to do with the large traditional publishers at all. And so it's a wonderful new world for authors. It takes some effort, but that effort can be fun and really a means of personal growth. And so really it's great that people have this new opportunity.
Do you have any of your books there that you can hold up for us? We'd love to see them.
I thought about that this morning, and I thought to myself, where are the copies of my books? I run out of most of the copies, and the answer to that is I don't have them in my hand. I'm so sorry.
That's all right. We can send them to do you have a website, an author website, or?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Okay, so where can they go?
So people can go to David Gregory Books, plural, davidgregorybooks.com.
Okay.
And my new ebook that's coming out has its own website. It's called patriotrules.com. patriotrules.com.
Great. So we'll send people there. I'll add the links to the bottom, and they can go to those websites. And you can always go to eliteonlinepublishing.com, and we'll put your book from Amazon on that website as well, so people can take a look at your book.
Fantastic.
So terrific. Any last words you want to give of encouragement and enthusiasm to our listeners?
Well, my biggest encouragement is to follow your dream. And if you have really thought for some time about wanting to put something into words that you think will be meaningful to people, I don't think people it's not a matter of wanting to become famous or have your 15 minutes, or any of that. It's just, especially I think if you view it as I want to produce something that will enhance others' lives in some way, that will be meaningful to them, that will perform a service for them, that will introduce them or help them think about a topic that is meaningful for them to think about or to introduce them to, and that will add to their lives. That's a tremendously beneficial and worthwhile thing to do. And so I encourage people to take those dreams and to begin to act upon them. And I think my other encouragement is get the assistance you need, which is to say, some people have great ideas and are great at writing the content or the basic content, but they need an editor, or they need a friend who, is just good at, punctuation or whatever, to come along and to, be willing to give them an honest critique. You don't want people just coming along and saying, hey, that's the greatest thing I ever read, and, they didn't really mean it. But it's amazing how people are willing to take the time to come alongside you and to help you produce something that can be a really quality product. And so, for instance, my writing instructor in graduate school, even after I graduated, kept on being my editor for Dinner with a Perfect Stranger, just because I think she believed in me and wanted to help me succeed. And so if people take the time to explore who is there around me who is willing to help me make this dream a reality, I think it's amazing oftentimes what they'll find.
That's awesome. Thanks for so much. Those were really great words of inspiration. So we're going to wrap it up here. Again, we're brought to you by Elite Online Publishing. So if you have that dream and you want to write your book, and just like David said, you need that little extra push or help, we're here to help you to get your book self-published and get it promoted and push you online to help you be a #1 bestseller. And if you want to spend time with us and go on a fabulous vacation down to the Dominican Republic, we have a week-long retreat where you can write your book, and we help you every step of the way, and we set up all your social media and your marketing while we're down there. So give us a contact, give us a shout at eliteonlinepublishing.com, and as well as bookwritingretreats.com. Thanks, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, David.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
For more information, visit hotchickswritehotbooks.com.